We acknowledge that Indigenous people are the traditional and ancestral guardians of this land that we now call Canada, and we come with respect for this land and for the people who have and do reside here. That this land remains unceded everywhere, while acknowledging that inherent and treaty rights exist, and that the promises in those treaties must be acknowledged and fully upheld. That all Canadians have a duty to acknowledge their relationship to the land upon which they live and work, and to prioritize initiatives that support reconciliation with local Indigenous communities. That the keepers of traditional Indigenous knowledge in every community are worthy of honor, consideration, and respect. That courageous Indigenous leaders, young and old, deserve the ongoing support of all Canadians to create equal opportunities for everyone of this land. That reconciliation will be successful when all Canadians have committed to learning about our shared past, listening to Indigenous truths, and pursuing a new and more inclusive, collaborative, and respectful path toward a better future.
I acknowledge that I live and work on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg, specifically the Ojibway, the Wendake-Nionwentsïo, the Mississauga, and the Haudenosaunee. I honor and appreciate this ancestral relationship and hope to walk with peace and allyship with the people who currently reside here and honor those First Nations who have provided stewardship over this land since time immemorial. These lands were covered by the Williams Treaties, and I recognize that the promises and provisions of those treaties have not been upheld by the colonial government. It is my responsibility to reflect and live by these words. Reconciliation, decolonization, indigenization, and allyship as terms or concepts may feel like big, uncomfortable, or unfamiliar territory. Although reconciliation is something that many people have probably at least heard of, especially since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in what we now call Canada, decolonization, allyship, and especially indigenization are generally much less familiar concepts and may feel overwhelming to look at. However, they are simply terms or concepts used to describe parts of a process and are taken step by step. This video is intended to start demystifying them and make them more accessible and achievable goals. Reconciliation and decolonization, for the purposes discussed in this video, are closely related, but they have different meanings and are directed at different but interconnected processes. Reconciliation, although in use since the 14th century, as we mean it and use it now, came into popular use after World War II to address the flagrant genocide and human rights violations that characterized much of the war, and the need to recognize, confront, and change the political and social structures that not only allowed but supported these crimes, while actively trying to make amends and reconcile with the persecuted group. In what we now call Canada, the reason for using the term is the same, but based here instead of halfway around the world, and is used to address the same kind of structures, political, social, economic, that continue to lead to and support ongoing rights violations, genocide, and systemic inequality between Indigenous people and settlers. To begin to change something, the first step is to recognize the issue exists and what the root cause or causes of it are. In this case, the systemic issues and colonial framework that supports this ongoing, mandated inequality. A colonial contemporary dictionary definition of reconciliation is the act of restoring to friendship or harmony, to settle or resolve, and the act of making consistent or congruous. The meaning of reconciliation now is exactly that, a deep need to create sustainable, consistent, equitable, and healthy structures and relationships moving forward, to reconcile with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, to achieve equal opportunities and the ability to have equal, or consistent and congruous, outcomes for all, Indigenous and settler alike. To reach this goal, the first step is recognizing, rejecting, and dismantling the colonial structures that continue to support inequalities and the racism and cultural norms and mindsets that grow from these structures. Decolonization is the process of this recognition and rejection of the colonial status quo and active dismantling of the culture, policies, laws, and other structures that perpetuate these inequalities. It involves recognition of the privilege that being a settler comes with and willingness to challenge and change cultural norms and belief systems, including one's own. This can sound like a monumental, overwhelming task. And if one individually looks at the big picture, it kind of is. However, just as with so many other issues that started as the status quo, small acts and steps can grow to a huge wave of change that alters the status quo forever. We've seen it with the civil rights movement, women's rights movements, LGBTQ, now 2S, LGBTQIA+, climate change, and so many other issues. Some of these movements toward equality have seen more progress than others, but each started with people recognizing that governmental, legal, and cultural structures and constructs which were supporting inequality needed to be recognized as wrong, challenged, and changed. Currently, in what we now call Canada, there are still many areas where there are unequal outcomes. Some of the roots of these unequal outcomes are very clear, like the Indian Act, which essentially makes First Nations wards of the federal government, and some of which are more subtle, such as the vast overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the judicial and child welfare system. The root causes of these issues are not as clear, but include the Indian Act, as well as cultural biases, historical systems that are still being acted on, even on an unspoken or unwritten level, and the lingering effects of generational trauma caused by many wrongs done in the name of colonialism. Some examples of these are residential schools, the reserve system, the denial of Métis existence, systematic cultural destruction, the 60s scoops, and many more. The process of beginning to see, name, and confront these structures and belief systems that lead to such inequality can seem overwhelming. However, if taken on a personal, local level and done, as it must be, in conjunction with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people and communities in your area, is achievable. True decolonization and reconciliation requires research, learning, hearing truths that may be very uncomfortable to hear, open-mindedness, and a willingness to stand as an ally and speak up for equality and Inuit, Métis, and First Nations rights. The willingness to not just listen, but truly hear what is being said by the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit you are on the path of reconciliation with is absolutely vital. When you listen to individuals, read a book, watch a video, or have any other interaction where information is being shared, an open mind and heart, compassion, and letting go of personal biases and preconceptions is of key importance. It needs to be noted that this work can be very emotionally and mentally difficult. It's extremely important to ensure you practice really good self-care as you walk this journey, especially if you have trauma in your own background. Recognizing your own abilities, limits, and comfort level will help ensure you can walk this path while caring for your own mental and emotional health. SARVAC has a mental wellness resource page where you can find many additional supports if you find you are triggered and need support beyond what you already have. The website is noted here, and a link will also be listed at the end of the video. Keep in mind, not everything will be explained in what you hear or read, and you might find some information you receive as contradictory. You may hear a story and not understand the underlying systemic reasons for the experience, and it may not be appropriate or possible to ask questions of the person telling the story or sharing the experience. There is some work and research you will need to do on your own. The idea is that you will build local relationships where you can ask thoughtful, careful, and compassionate questions. The contradictions you will encounter are part of being human, and every person having walked a different path and having a different perspective based on their own personal life experience. They in no way invalidate the overall need for and goal of decolonization and reconciliation. Shown here, and listed again at the end of this video, is a link to a TED Talk on reconciliation and decolonization, which also has some further links to other videos. It's a very good and fairly brief 14-minute video that can be a really good start for your personal journey. A term that doesn't get talked about a lot is indigenization, yet it must be at the root of all reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship activities. Without indigenization, trying to do reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship is, in many ways, meaningless. This is not meant in a confrontational way at all, but in a factual way, as the root of what we are trying to do is eliminate the inequality that exists, and not having the people affected involved simply perpetuates the inequality. There is a saying that should always be in the forefront of one's mind when walking down this path, and that is, nothing for us without us. What this really means is that if you try to work on decolonization, reconciliation, and allyship in isolation, instead of in community with Métis, Inuit, and First Nations, then the work is not grounded in the correct place. Indigenization means the full informed consent and approval must be obtained, which requires developing and entering into relationship with those people or communities involved. The same principle holds whether one is undertaking this work at a personal level, SAR group level, workplace, or any other level. The involvement of the community or communities impacted or in the area is critical. In the case of SAR group level work, there may be many groups involved, multiple communities that contain Inuit, First Nations, or Métis, maybe even different nations. Each of these distinct groups will have different perspectives and potentially may have different structures that need decolonizing so that reconciliation can happen. Working on reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship requires the intentional, respectful, and honored involvement of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations in your area or are impacted or involved in the project you are working on. That means that one must enter into these relationships and involvements with no preconceived idea of where it will end up or a goal in mind. Some ideas and concepts may have to be changed or abandoned if they do not align with or are not supported by the community or communities you are working or in relationship with. There may not be any established relationship with the community or communities in your area, and you might be the one who needs to establish that relationship. There are some good suggestions on how to approach this in the Land Territory Acknowledgements video, and links for some resources will be provided at the end of this video. There is always the HWF Indigenous Resources page on the Sarvac HWF website available with a vast list of resources that can also assist you in this process. To take this step, to reach out and start trying to build new relationships, can feel very intimidating, especially once one has some awareness of the colonial history and what we now call Canada. The fear of making a misstep, asking the wrong question, or saying the wrong thing is a very realistic fear. But the key is keeping an open and honest heart with humility and respect at the center. If the 4 R's from Cree elder Dr. Verna Kirkness are always kept in the forefront, respect, reciprocity, relevance, and responsibility, that will carry a very long way, and most people will see your intentions and help you through those uncomfortable first steps. An honest statement as to not knowing what the correct approach is and asking for guidance will also go a long way. It shows you are willing to be vulnerable yourself and that you're also willing to learn and listen. Most people are quite happy, even eager, to answer questions asked in such a way. Not to sound contradictory, But it's also important to be sensitive to and keep in mind that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis have had different experiences with settler folk, some good, some incredibly hurtful. Due to this, you may get different levels of welcome, and it may take time for people to trust your good intentions. You may not find the right person or people to approach on the first try, or even the second or third, but with humble persistence, you will make progress on the journey. Allyship is the most active part of the decolonization and reconciliation journey. It is the standing with those whose voices and rights colonial structures and culture are trying to suppress and oppress. It can range from a quiet solidarity to a very vocal and physical way of supporting. Some people will say that if you are not being hit by stones, you are a bystander, not an ally. But we take a much broader view on allyship in this context. Once there is an understanding of what reconciliation and decolonization are, and the steps that are a part of that have been explained and understood through Indigenization, then allyship can actively start. One of the first and most important parts of being an ally may sound counterintuitive, but is very important, and that is fully recognizing and being aware of your own privilege as a settler person. This recognition of privilege can be a very uncomfortable and unfamiliar place to sit, especially if one grew up with poverty or trauma, particularly extreme or long-standing generational trauma. Personally, I experienced both, but my culture, language, customs, clothes, and family connections were not stripped of me against my will and against my family's will. In no way do we mean to minimize that terrible trauma has occurred to settler folk, and that, especially for survivors of human trafficking. Many things may have been stripped from you against you and your family's will. If they did, compassion and support are yours, and the ability to see and sit with privilege may come much harder or may not come at all. Personally, it took a long time and a great deal of personal reflection to realize that despite the trauma I experienced and all the after effects from it, I still have a great deal of privilege simply by being born a settler. Even so, there are many times I have to stop and reconnect with the privilege that comes with being born a settler. The point being made here really is that if you are a settler person, the options to obtain help to recover from trauma and the supports available, including the policing system, judicial system, and social systems and supports, are more than what was and is available to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, even to this day. Another way to look at it is ask, what would you not have in your life, or what opportunities would not have been available to you if you were not born or raised as a settler? Recognizing that some people were raised as though they were settlers, while actually being First Nations, Métis, Inuit, or a combination. Indigenization is key to allyship, as the actions taken as an ally must be based in what is asked of you by the group or community you are in relationship with. When you are grounded in what is needed of you, then you can stand with the community or group and lend your voice to theirs. The way colonial government thinks and works, those with perceived privilege, or those who, in the government's mindset, have nothing or little to gain, and potentially, in their eyes, something to lose, will be given greater consideration and weight than those with a perceived gain. Therefore, your privilege can act as a tool or leverage to add to the voices of those asking for change, ensuring again that your voice is based in indigenization and has the full support of those you are walking as an ally with. While standing as an ally, one thing to be aware of and prepared for is that there are those who will meet your words and actions with resistance, possibly to the point of outright hostility, from First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, and from other settler folk. For Métis, Inuit, and First Nations who have generational and possibly recent trauma, any settler person may be a trigger, just as for someone who has survived domestic violence, a person who looks like the abuser may be a trigger. Trust may have been broken beyond their ability to see or believe your intentions. That is their journey to heal, but your place to understand, have compassion for, and respect. For other settlers, many people do not like the status quo being challenged, especially if they do not have an understanding of why, or if they do not agree with the reason it is being challenged. This will be especially true if they believe they will lose something in the process of the status quo changing. Challenging the status quo is generally an uncomfortable place, even for the person or people doing it, regardless of how much they believe in the necessity of it. Change is rarely something that is met with open arms and a happy heart. Even those who are more comfortable with change and believe in the reason for it can still find this a challenging place to sit in. Something else to be aware of and keep in mind is that as you are working on allyship and entering into and being in community with Inuit, Métis, and First Nations in your area, you will find that there are certain activities, ceremonies, and spaces that are not appropriate to be shared with a settler person, regardless of your depth of commitment to allyship. These times and spaces must be absolutely respected without question. If you are invited to participate in a special activity or ceremony, it is a great honor. Ensure as you're entering into this work that you are comfortable and ready for what we've been discussing. Potential pushback and anger from settler folk, First Nations, Métis, or Inuit, and exclusion from private spaces and activities. As mentioned earlier, please practice good self-care. Have supports in place for when you do get triggered, and take time to care for yourself through this process. As with any allyship or support, if you can't take care of yourself, you won't be able to stand with anyone effectively. If direct, active, and in-person allyship is not possible for any reason, including personal history, there are still things you can do to show your support. There are many Indigenous-owned businesses that can be supported by purchasing their products. These are available all across what we now call Canada, and most, if not all, will ship. One can purchase stickers, key tags, wristbands, t-shirts, and many other things from Indigenous craftspeople and businesses that can help show your support and spur conversations. You just have to know your own personal comfort level as to what you're willing to show to the world and what reactions you may get from what you are showing. It needs to be made very clear that all of the information in this video in no way means that SARVAC expects or demands that anyone undertake the journey of reconciliation, decolonization, indigenization, and allyship. We certainly hope that this information and the information in the land and territory acknowledgement video will encourage and support you to start on this journey, but it must come from a place of personal belief in its importance and a personal conviction that it is the right thing to do for you. If you do undertake this journey, we will certainly support you as much as we are able. Shown here is a list of some of the key resources that we've discussed in the video that can help start your journey. The SARVAC HWF website, as mentioned, has a very extensive body of resources that can be accessed, the majority of which are at no charge. Links are also provided here to the TED Talk, the National Association of Friendship Centers, and other resources that you may find helpful.